Today I will be giving you a quick overview of the layouts of the long sides of the box and of the back piece. Now, this long piece which I have here will wrap around the left, front, and right sides of the box with a separate back piece which will be folded over the raw edges and will cover these ends here. Now, the layout of this piece is the most complicated and involves the most changes from Jacob's pattern. However, there is a very good place to start here. I worked from the center and then out, which I found the easiest way to work because this motif and this motif right here, which I have marked as motif I and motif B on the motif key, which you can find on my website. These are charted in relation to each other exactly as they are on Jacob's pattern, seen here and here. The only difference being that you cut this off at 4 rows above the center line. That gives you your exact placement for bottom and top of this side, and then once you have those in place, you can work outwards in both directions, and that will help you keep everything in the right position. So I recommend starting here, then working C, D, E to get your entire bottom row in, and then beginning here as it's charted on Jacob's chart, and then that will help you fill in the rest of the motifs. So I'd like to point a few things out here, which is one, obviously my strip of linen is way too narrow. I'm not sure what I was thinking. I cut this terribly, and I realized not long after I had started stitching that I made a big mistake. However, when you make mistakes, you can usually find a way to rescue them. And here that meant that I did not have enough space to work in a hoop, which means I had to work all of these top elements here in hand, unlike the bottom ones, which were worked in the small oval hoops that I use. Now, this meant that there was much more distortion at the top than there is at the bottom. I have laid the bottom out with my metal L-shaped ruler across so that you can see that although this has not yet been blocked, the bottom is actually fairly straight and it's not suffering too much distortion. If I flip this around to the top and I line it up with one motif here, you can see that it's actually up a few threads here. It's sort of correct there, and then it's most distorted here. This also isn't lying completely flat because there is much more distortion here at the top despite the limited amount of work undertaken in hand. My strong recommendation for this piece is to obviously use a bigger piece of fabric when you're working the sides, or at least a wider piece, so that you can do it all in a hoop or in Q-snaps, however you like to work, and to not work in hand if you can all avoid it. And if you do have to work in hand, please stab and do not scoop. I used the stabbing in hand method here, and it resulted in distortion, but nothing that can't be taken out in blocking. Scooping in hand would result in considerably more distortion and a much more difficult blocking job before you can get this on the box. It's especially important with these pieces because they are linear and they are going on a box, meaning you need everything to line up. So all of the distortion at the top, which may not look that considerable right now, but when you are trying to fit this to a defined piece actually is very important, is going to have to be very carefully blocked out. And this made entirely square, straight, and true with an even weave so that it will properly fit the space which it has been designed to fill. Now, the more general points on the layout, and I can't find my pen, I was was pointing with. So we're gonna go with the end of the X-Acto knife and hope I don't maim myself. I started in the center here. This is motif A, which can be found on pages 4 and 8. Then I worked to motif B, found on pages 8 and 12, out to motif C from pages 1 and 2. This is a repeat, you might notice, from the back side of the lid. However, these 5 motifs of these sizes, which are about equal, wrapped perfectly around the 3 sides of the box. I could not ignore how easy the fit was going to be if I just repeated one motif so that I had 5 of the same size filling the space of the box. If you don't care for this motif, you can repeat another one, but that's up to you. So motif C, motif, and I said motif C is page 1 and 2. Motif D, found on pages 5 and 9, and then motif E, which is half of the motif, and you can find it on pages 9 and 10. As you can see from the pattern here, Jacob has given you the entire motif. I cut it right off at the center line. And then we're going to move to the top. So although I recommend starting here to fill in motif I, because that's exactly as it's charted in relation to motif B on Jacob's pattern, you can find this on page 12 to get these 2 motifs to relate to each other properly. Start here. I have labeled from the left side and worked all the way across the top just for ease of not making the diagram look like a complete mess. So the labels and the equivalent pages, this is motif F, found at the top corner of page 4, and on which 5 rows have been added above the center line right here. This is motif G, again a repeat from the lid, and this is found on page 15, in which I have worked 1 row over the center line. Moving on, motif H, which is minus 3 rows from the center line. So when you're working these, you can either work in relation to each other or count up from the motifs you've placed in the bottom. There are full counts in the layout photos on my website. This is motif I, the one you should be working first on the top. And then this is motif J. Oh, okay, so H is found on page 13, I is found on pages 12 and 8, and J is found on pages 3 and 4. I, as I mentioned before, is worked 4 rows above the center line, and J is worked 3 rows above the center line. The additional filler here I have numbered. This is filler 1, found on page 6, 2, found on page 12, 3, which is the corner motif on page 1, right here, the corner of this little starry element, and then 4, found on page 15, and 5, found on page 9. And then I have filled in again with scattered letters and numbers worked over 1 taken from Jacob's chart. If you want to follow my exact placement, again, these are all found on the layout diagrams on my website, which will give you guideline counts so that you can exactly place everything to follow my stitch. That should cover the layout of the 3 sides, and then we will move to the back. The back is a much simpler piece than the long 3 sides. As you can see, I'm working a little out of order here, and I have already blocked this and glued it to the backing paper just to stay on top of all the work I need to do in order to have this finished for you guys. This has a very, very simple layout. So the back is comprised of 3 main motifs and then filled in with over 1 letters and numbers. This is motif A, B, and C. Now, motif A is the largest. That is found on pages 12 and 16. As you can see, it's this large one right here, and that has been worked, I'm totally blanking, I think it was 14 rows over the center line, but again, check the layout on my website, which will give you the exact number. 15. Check the layout photos, sorry. Apparently I'm not as well prepared as I should have been. Motif B is worked exactly as it's charted, and that's found over 4 pages, 6, 7, 10, and 11, right here. And then motif C, you have half of it on page 16, right in the corner here, and then you'll have to flip it out to get the full thing. And then I decided to place out the letters and numbers randomly to show my initials and the year 2021. Now, I did this because, as I explained in my episode, launching the stitch along, I wanted the letters on the box to have meaning to me, and I made them family initials, but because we have so many repeating initials in a relatively small family, by the time I got to the back, I was out. So I decided to keep the scattered random look that is characteristic of Jacob's original pattern, but instead do a kind of jumbled puzzle orientation of my initials and the year. If you have additional initials or numbers that you would like to use or that are significant to you, just fill in around these motifs as you like. So that concludes our general overview of the layouts of the stitched pieces for the Simple Harmony box. Again, all the detailed counts and guidelines can be found on my website, which you should reference when you're stitching. It will help you to place all of the motifs exactly.